The towel fell, but it wasn't just a slip. It was a moment that changed everything between us. As I stood there, exposed, the seconds stretched, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me like never before. His eyes, wide with surprise, slowly darkened with something else, something deeper. My heart raced, and I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or something more dangerous that surged through me. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. But in that silence, I knew we were both wondering, was this the beginning of something we couldn't take back? "Hi there," Sophie says, her voice smooth and calm as she speaks into the camera. "I'm Sophie, and I want to share a secret with you, a story that I've kept to myself for far too long. I'm 39, and I've spent most of my adult life focusing on my career, my independence. I've always kept to myself, living in a quiet house near the woods, away from the world. But this one summer, things changed. My nephew, Evan, came to visit. I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't seen him in years. But that summer would turn out to be a lot more than I could have ever imagined. It's funny how one little moment can change everything, isn't it?" Sophie paused, a wistful smile tugging at her lips as she looked out the window, remembering the events that still lingered in her heart. It was a warm summer afternoon when Evan arrived. I wasn't prepared for how much he had changed. The little boy I remembered was no longer there. He was a man now, tall and broad-shouldered with those intense eyes. We hugged when he walked in, and even that felt different. My heart raced for reasons I couldn't explain. Evan was always a kind and affectionate kid, but this time, there was something more. Something that felt electric. I brushed it off, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But as I led him into the living room and we talked, I felt it. Every word, every glance he gave me, lingered longer than it ever had before. He laughed at my jokes, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. "It's been too long, Aunt Sophie," he said with a smile that made my heart skip. "It feels so good to be here with you." We spent the evening together, talking about his life, his dreams. He spoke of college, his friends, and his uncertainty about what was next. I listened intently, feeling a strange pull in my chest. He had always been like a son to me, especially after his mother passed away, but now, it was different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the way he looked at me, it was as if he saw me in a way he never had before. And the way I looked at him? Well, that felt new too. The next morning, we decided to spend the day by the lake. The weather was perfect, and I thought it would be a great way to relax. We swam, we joked, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. But then something happened. As I was getting out of the water, I reached for my towel, wrapping it around myself. The fabric slipped from my shoulders without warning, falling to the ground, exposing me completely for a second. My heart stopped. I quickly bent down to pick it up, but I felt his eyes on me. Evan was standing just a few feet away, his face flushed, his breath shaky. He didn't say a word, but the silence between us was thick with tension. I straightened up, my hands trembling as I tried to cover myself. "Sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen," I said quickly, feeling embarrassed, but also oddly aware of the way he was looking at me. His eyes were wide, his gaze lingering, and I could tell it wasn't just surprise. It was something deeper. Something I had never seen before. Evan turned quickly, but I noticed the way his jaw clenched, like he was holding something back. "It's okay, Aunt Sophie. No need to apologize," he said, his voice low. But it wasn't okay. Not for me. I could feel my heart racing, my body betraying me with each passing moment. There was a strange pull between us now, something that neither of us could ignore. I tried to brush it off, but it lingered. I kept thinking about that moment, replaying it in my mind over and over. That evening, after the lake incident, things between us felt different. We were still talking, still spending time together, but I could feel the weight of what had happened hanging in the air. Evan was quieter than usual, and I found myself becoming more aware of his every movement. The way his muscles flexed when he reached for something, the way his eyes seemed to linger just a little too long when he spoke to me. We ended up sitting on the porch together, watching the sun set over the lake. I felt the tension building between us, and for the first time in my life, I was unsure of what to do. He was my nephew. He had always been like a son to me. But now, the way he looked at me, the way he smiled, it made my heart ache with a longing I didn't know how to handle. I've been thinking, Evan said, breaking the silence. About what you said the other day. About being true to ourselves, you know? Sometimes I wonder if I'm just pretending to be someone I'm not. I looked at him, my heart pounding. What do you mean? I mean, there's always been a part of me that felt like I was trying to live up to something. Like I was just going through the motions. But when I'm here with you, Aunt Sophie, everything feels different. It feels real. My breath caught in my throat. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? Did he feel the same pull between us? I wasn't sure, but my heart ached with the possibility. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging between us like an unspoken promise. It was late that night when the tension finally reached its peak. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day in my mind, the way Evan looked at me, the way I looked at him. And when I finally couldn't take it any longer, I went to find him. He was sitting on the couch, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the TV. I took a deep breath and sat down beside him. He didn't look at me at first, but when I placed my hand gently on his arm, he looked up, his expression soft. I need to tell you something, I whispered. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew this moment would change everything. I don't know what's happening, Evan, but I can't stop thinking about you. And I don't know how to make it stop. His eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand brushing mine. I've been thinking about you too, Aunt Sophie, he said softly. I can't explain it, but when I'm around you, it feels like everything else disappears. Like we're the only two people in the world. The air between us seemed to crackle with electricity. And before I could stop myself, I leaned in, my lips brushing his. It was a soft kiss at first, tentative, but when he kissed me back, the world around us faded away. The kiss deepened, and my heart raced. This wasn't just a kiss, it was a release. It was late that night when the tension finally reached its peak. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with everything that had happened over the past few days. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could think about was Evan. The way he smiled, the way his hands seemed to linger just a little too long when he touched me. And then there was that moment by the lake, when my towel had slipped. An accident, but one that had changed everything between us. I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something undeniable between us. I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced when he was near, or the way his eyes seemed to speak to me in ways words never could. It was confusing, overwhelming, but it felt real. My feelings for him were no longer just a quiet whisper, they were loud, demanding my attention. Unable to sleep, I decided to go downstairs to find him. The house was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator. I could see a faint light coming from the living room. Evan was sitting on the couch, staring at the screen, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else. His posture was tense, his eyes distant. I hesitated at the doorway, my heart thumping. Should I say something? Was it too soon? Would this ruin everything? But the pull toward him was too strong. Taking a deep breath, I crossed the room and sat beside him. He didn't move at first, but then I gently placed my hand on his arm. He looked at me, his gaze softening as he took in my presence. There was something about the way he looked at me now, something that felt tender, almost longing. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't keep this inside anymore, Evan. He turned to face me, his eyes serious, but there was a flicker of something else in them, something warm, something that made my heart ache. What is it, Aunt Sophie? He asked quietly, his voice low and soothing. I paused, unsure of how to put it into words. I can't stop thinking about you. I don't know when it started, but I feel like something has changed between us. And I don't know what to do about it. There was silence for a long moment. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for him to speak, unsure of what he would say. Would he laugh? Would he be angry? But when he finally spoke, his words took me completely by surprise. I've been thinking about you too, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know why, but whenever I'm near you, it feels like everything else fades away. Like you're the only person in the world, and I just can't help it. I looked at him, my heart racing. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and in that moment, I couldn't deny it anymore. I needed him just as much as he needed me. Without thinking, I leaned in, my lips brushing against his in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss full of hesitation, uncertainty, but also longing. I could feel his breath catch as his hands gently cupped my face, pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, slow at first, as if we were both afraid of what might happen next. But as his lips moved against mine, the world around us seemed to fade into nothingness. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a release. A release from the confusion, the tension, the feelings we had both been hiding. And when his hands slid to my back, pulling me even closer, I couldn't hold back any longer. Our bodies pressed against each other as the kiss grew more urgent, more passionate. I could feel the heat of his body, the strong beat of his heart against mine. It was as if we had been waiting for this moment our entire lives. His lips trailed down my neck, and I gasped, the sensation sending a wave of heat through my body. My hands slid into his hair, pulling him closer, urging him to never stop. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured against my skin, his voice hoarse. "I just didn't know how to tell you." "You don't have to," I whispered back, my voice trembling with desire. "I want this too." There was no more hesitation now. Our kisses grew more intense, and I could feel him trembling under my touch. Slowly, I leaned back, taking his hand and guiding him toward the stairs. My pulse raced with anticipation as I led him to my room, every step bringing us closer to something we both craved. When we reached my bed, I turned to face him, my hands trembling as I unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the strong, toned chest I had only admired from afar before. My fingers traced the lines of his muscles, and I felt his breath catch. Evan kissed me again, deeper this time, his hands sliding under my shirt. I shivered as his fingers brushed against my skin, igniting a fire that I didn't know how to control. The tension between us was palpable, thick with desire. And as our bodies pressed together, I couldn't think of anything else except the way we made each other feel. He pulled away for a moment, looking into my eyes with a mixture of uncertainty and longing. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low and filled with emotion. I nodded, my hands sliding down his chest to the waistband of his jeans. "I'm sure," I whispered, my lips curling into a smile. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And with that, we gave in to the desire that had been building between us for so long. The next morning, everything felt different. The sun was streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room, but there was a sense of quiet intimacy between us that made everything feel more intense. As I woke up and saw Evan lying beside me, his face soft in sleep, I couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion wash over me. This wasn't just about physical desire. It was about something deeper, something that connected us in ways I couldn't explain. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, watching him stir. When his eyes fluttered open and met mine, I saw that same warmth in them that had been there the night before. He smiled softly, his hand reaching for mine. "I never thought this would happen," he said, his voice full of wonder. "But I don't regret it, Aunt Sophie." "I don't either," I replied softly, feeling my heart swell with emotions I couldn't put into words. "We can't go back, can we?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "But I don't want to. Not now." And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. There were still questions, still uncertainty, but one thing was clear: we were no longer just aunt and nephew. We were something more. Something that couldn't be undone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. There were still questions, still uncertainty, but one thing was clear: we were no longer just aunt and nephew. We were something more. Something that couldn't be undone. As I lay there beside him, his fingers gently tracing circles on my skin, I thought for a moment that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make this work. But just as that thought settled in my mind, a small noise outside the window caught my attention. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but then I heard it again. A shadow flickered against the curtains, moving slowly. My heart skipped a beat. I turned to Evan, and he looked at me with the same confused expression. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Evan's face went pale as he slowly stood up, his eyes scanning the room. The last thing I expected was for someone to be watching us, but then we both froze as a figure became clear through the window, a person standing just outside, staring right at us. It wasn't just any figure, it was someone we knew. Someone we hadn't expected to be there. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Evan moved quickly toward the window, his heart pounding in his chest. When he pulled back the curtain just enough to get a better look, his expression turned to one of complete shock. It's my friend Alex," Evan murmured. He must have been watching us." The realization hit me like a freight train. We weren't alone. And the last thing I wanted was for someone to know the secret we had just discovered about ourselves. I quickly moved to cover myself, panic rising in my chest. What do we do now? What if he tells someone? Evan hesitated for a moment, but then his eyes met mine with a newfound resolve. He didn't look scared anymore, he looked determined. "We deal with it," he said, taking my hand. "We have to. We can't let this be the end." As I stood there, facing the window with the knowledge that our secret was no longer safe, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer we could hide the truth. But in that moment, I realized something else. I didn't want to hide anymore. Evan slowly walked back to the bed, pulling me gently toward him. He sat down, his gaze softening as he took my hand once again. "Sophie," he said, his voice filled with a quiet but firm conviction. "This is real. And I know it's messy, but I don't want to pretend it's not. I don't want to hide from it anymore. We can figure this out, but we have to do it together." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded, feeling the weight of everything we had just gone through. But as I looked into his eyes, the world outside the window no longer seemed so threatening. We were in this together, and nothing could take that away. "I don't know what the future holds, Evan," I whispered, "but I know that what we have, it's real." Evan smiled, his hand gently cupping my cheek. "And I'll do whatever it takes to protect us, Sophie. Whatever it takes."